Millionaire is surprised by a little girl on the street who tells him, "I know you, your photo is in Daddy's wallet." The man is shocked to discover that Rodrigo was the kind of man who, from the outside, seemed to have made it big. He lived in a gigantic mansion with glass walls that let in sunlight in the morning and offered a panoramic view of the city at night. Every corner of the house exuded wealth. Expensive works of art hung on the walls, designer furniture was on display, and even the floors were made of imported marble. In the garage, luxury cars sparkled in the light, and in the garden, fountains and sculptures created a landscape worthy of a palace. He was a shrewd businessman who started with nothing. As a young man, Rodrigo had left home with little money in his pocket, but with an untiring desire to change his life. He worked hard, sacrificed nights of sleep and weekends, and turned down parties, meetings with friends, and even love. And every sacrifice seemed to have been worth it, at least, that's what he used to tell himself. Now, at 55, what he had achieved was undeniable. His name was engraved on luxurious buildings, magazines spoke of him as the epitome of success, and he would never have to worry about money again. But ironically, what he didn't have, no amount of money could buy: company. Rodrigo, with all his luxury, lived surrounded by silence. When he opened the doors of his mansion, the echo of footsteps was the only response he received. He had employees, of course. The gardener, the maid, the driver, but they were fleeting professional presences. No one who truly knew who Rodrigo was inside. Sometimes, he would watch them from afar, talking to each other, laughing. And a pang of envy would arise, a longing for something he no longer knew what it was like. As night fell, the immensity of the house seemed even greater. Rodrigo would often sit in the center of the living room, a room so spacious that it seemed made for grand parties, parties that he never threw. He would look around and feel the weight of emptiness. At times like these, when the silence was deafening, memories came back like ghosts. He remembered the people he had lost along the way, the decisions he had made, especially one in particular that haunted him more than any other. This memory took him back to the past, to a time when he was still young and full of dreams. A time when he had met a woman whose name he avoided even thinking about. A relationship that had left its mark, deeper than any visible scar. And at that time, Rodrigo had made the hardest choice of his life. He had decided to walk away, thinking it was for the best. His work, his success, his career, all of that seemed more important than anything else. But now, he wasn't sure if it had really been the right thing to do. It was as if the more wealth he accumulated, the more he lost the things that really mattered. And now here, surrounded by everything money could buy, he didn't have what he wanted most: a family, someone to share his achievements, his pain, his memories with. He had built an empire, but he had not built any bonds. The nights were the worst. Rodrigo slept little. His sleep was light and interrupted by thoughts that insisted on returning, memories of the past, regrets kept under lock and key. He often wondered if everything he had achieved was worth the price he had paid. Every work of art, every car, every penny he had in the bank, what use were they now? The world looked at Rodrigo with admiration, but no one knew what was going on behind the gates of his mansion. On the outside, he was a man of absolute success, the example of someone who succeeded in life. But on the inside, he was just a lonely man, imprisoned by his own choices. A life of luxury, yes, but a life that, with each passing day, seemed emptier. And so Rodrigo lived his days, walking through long, silent corridors, observing the wealth he had built with so much effort, but which was not able to fill the emptiness he felt in his chest. Rodrigo had the habit of occasionally going out for a walk through the city streets. Despite all his wealth, there was something calming about blending in with the ordinary flow of people, feeling the movement of life around him. It was an attempt to escape, even if only for a few hours, from the suffocating silence of his mansion. That day, the air was pleasant, and he decided to take a stroll through a nearby park. As he walked, lost in his own thoughts, he observed the people around him. Couples walking hand in hand, children running and laughing, parents playing with their children. These were scenes that always made him reflect on what was missing in his life. But accustomed to ignoring these sensations, he continued his solitary walk. Suddenly, he felt a small hand tugging on his sleeve. Rodrigo turned around, surprised. In front of him was a little girl of about 6 years old. Her brown hair was tied in 2 ponytails, and her large eyes stared at him with a mixture of curiosity and determination. She seemed a little nervous, as if she had gathered a lot of courage to approach him. Rodrigo was momentarily disconcerted. It wasn't common for children to approach him, much less with the confidence that the girl demonstrated. He bent down a little, trying to reach her height. "Hi, how are you?" he asked, still not understanding what was happening. The girl watched him for a few seconds, biting her lip as if she was choosing her words carefully. Then, in a soft but firm voice, she said, "I know you. Your picture is in my daddy's wallet." Those words hit Rodrigo like a bolt of lightning. He frowned, confused. "What do you mean, my picture?" he asked, feeling a strange mix of anxiety and curiosity. Who could this girl's father be? Why would someone be carrying a picture of him? He wasn't a public figure to the point that his pictures were out there, in the hands of strangers. The little girl looked at him with an innocent expression, not realizing the impact that his words were causing. "In my daddy's wallet. I saw your picture there," she repeated, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Rodrigo felt his heart race. That sentence echoed in his mind, and he didn't know how to react. Was it some kind of mistake? But something in the way the girl spoke kept him from simply ignoring it. He took a deep breath and, with a kindness he rarely showed, asked, "Who is your father, little one? What is his name?" The girl smiled, as if she found it funny that he didn't know the answer. "His name is Gabriel," she replied, with the lightness of someone telling something common. And in that moment, Rodrigo's world seemed to stop. That name, buried for so long in the back of his mind, returned with overwhelming force. A name he hadn't heard in over 2 decades. Gabriel. His son. The son he left behind. Rodrigo felt a chill run down his spine, and the silence he knew so well became even heavier. He couldn't believe it. Gabriel had a daughter. That little girl, who was now looking at him with an innocent smile, was his granddaughter. Rodrigo tried to speak, but the words seemed to be lost before they reached his mouth. He knelt down, looking deeply into the girl's eyes, trying to find some similarity, some clue that would confirm reality. And there it was, in her wide eyes and carefree smile. He saw a reflection of himself, of a past he had never been able to erase. "Your father." Rodrigo began, but his voice failed. He took a deep breath, trying to process the situation. "Your father. Does he talk about me?" he asked, not sure what he expected to hear. The girl shook her head, still smiling. "He never talks about you much, but Grandma says he knows you. And he always keeps your picture in his wallet." Rodrigo remained silent. Emotions hit him like an avalanche. He didn't know what to say or how to react. It was as if the past had come back to confront him, in the form of that little girl, without him being prepared to deal with it. Rodrigo was still stunned. The name the little girl had mentioned echoed in his mind, Gabriel. That name, so familiar, yet so distant at the same time. It was as if the past he had carefully locked away in a hidden chest inside himself had suddenly been opened, and the memories began to spread like a whirlwind. "Gabriel," he repeated, almost voicelessly, staring at the girl in front of him, trying to absorb the impact of that. She nodded, as if it were no big deal. To her, Gabriel was just her father, someone ordinary and present in her life. But for Rodrigo, that name carried decades of memories, regrets, and above all, a wound he had tried to ignore for so long. He bent down until he was at the girl's level, his eyes desperately searching for more answers. "Tell me more about your father, my dear. What is he like?" Rodrigo's voice was hesitant, almost afraid of what would come next. He didn't know what to expect, but the truth began to unfold before his eyes relentlessly. The girl smiled, unaware of the whirlwind of emotions in the man in front of her. "My dad is the best. He plays with me, takes me for walks, and tells me funny stories at bedtime." There was an innocent sparkle in her eyes as she spoke, as if she couldn't imagine the world being any different. "He works hard, but he always comes home to kiss me goodnight." Rodrigo felt the weight of those words. Gabriel, his son, the boy he had left so many years ago, was now a man, a father. And from the looks of it, a loving father, something he, Rodrigo, had never been. Regret began to grow inside him like a flame he couldn't extinguish. He had chosen to walk away, thinking he was doing the right thing, believing that Gabriel would be better off without him. But now, hearing Gabriel's daughter speak with such joy and pride about her father, Rodrigo realized what he had lost. Does he talk about me?" Rodrigo asked, his voice trembling, fearing the answer. Maybe Gabriel never told his daughter about him. Maybe he was erased from Gabriel's life story, and rightly so. He wasn't there. He wasn't the father he should have been. He had run away when things got tough, choosing to build an empire over a family. The girl hesitated for a moment. "He doesn't talk about you much," she said, still in the same light, carefree tone. "But Grandma does sometimes. She says you knew each other when he was little." The girl blinked a few times, innocently. "But I never understood why you don't see each other." Those words cut Rodrigo deeply. He remembered Gabriel's mother, the woman he had loved and then left, thinking he was doing the right thing by allowing her and Gabriel to have a life away from his complications. But now, all the justifications he had given himself seemed hollow. Suddenly, an old memory began to form, like an old film being rewound in his mind. He remembered an afternoon, many years ago, when he, still young and full of ambition, had said goodbye to Gabriel. He had promised he would return, but he knew deep down that he was leaving forever. He remembered the sadness in the boy's eyes, how he had held Rodrigo's hand, not understanding why his father was leaving. And now, more than 20 years later, Rodrigo was face to face with a part of his past that he had never expected to see again. Gabriel's daughter, his granddaughter, whom he had never met. The sense of loss, which he had previously kept under control, now flooded him. Rodrigo tried to hide his pain in front of the girl, but his mind was racing. He wanted to ask more, to know more about the son he had abandoned, about the life he had lost, but he didn't know where to begin. Every detail the girl told him seemed to sink him deeper into the abyss of his choices. The weight of regret was there, relentless, and he knew in that moment that his empire, his fortune, everything he had achieved, was worth nothing compared to what he had left behind. Rodrigo, still kneeling before the little girl, felt a whirlwind of emotions rising to the surface. The name Gabriel had awakened ghosts he had spent years trying to ignore. He needed to take a deep breath, he needed to process what was happening, but the memories wouldn't let him rest. Little by little, his mind was dragged to a past he had buried, a past that now refused to stay hidden. In a moment of clarity, Rodrigo began to reflect on the truth of his story, something he had never shared with anyone. Like a confession, he felt the urge to tell the audience that behind the rich and successful man, there was a father who had abandoned his son more than 20 years ago. Gabriel was that son. In his youth, Rodrigo was not the serious and reclusive man he had become. He was a young man full of dreams, but also full of uncertainties. In his early 20s, he fell in love with a woman named Anna, whom he met at a time in his life when everything seemed unstable. They had an intense relationship, full of ups and downs, with more promises than certainties. And it was in this whirlwind of emotions that Gabriel was born. Rodrigo never imagined himself as a father. He was just beginning to try to find his way in the world, to chart his first steps in his career. When Gabriel came into the world, Rodrigo was already consumed by his fears. He was terrified of not being up to the responsibility, of failing as a father, of being yet another example of absence in a child's life. He looked at Gabriel, so small and innocent, and all he could think was that maybe the boy would be better off without him. Over time, his relationship with Anna deteriorated. The fights became frequent, and the distance between them inevitable. Rodrigo could not deal with the pressures of being a father and a partner, while also struggling to make his career take off. Anna, realizing Rodrigo's dilemma, tried to keep the peace, but the relationship was already doomed. And then, in a moment of pure cowardice, Rodrigo made the decision that would haunt him forever. He left. He left, promising himself that he was doing the best for Gabriel, believing that his absence would be less harmful than his inconsistent presence. Anna took custody of the boy, and Rodrigo immersed himself in work, seeking success that, in his mind, would validate his choices. With each passing year, he distanced himself more and more from Gabriel, to the point of almost convincing himself that it was the right thing to do. Over the years, Rodrigo went on with his life, focused on his career. His fortune grew, his business prospered, and he achieved everything that, at the time, seemed most important. But with each professional victory came an increasingly heavy feeling of loss. He never had the courage to seek out Gabriel, to try to be a part of the life of the son he had left behind. The fear of not being the father Gabriel deserved had always paralyzed him. Rodrigo remembered how, in the first years after his departure, he still tried to follow Gabriel's life from afar. He knew where he lived, who he studied with, but he was never able to make contact. Once, he even wrote a letter to his son, but never sent it. The words, written with so much effort, seemed empty, insufficient to justify what he had done. Now, looking at that little girl, his granddaughter, a part of Gabriel he had never known, Rodrigo felt the full weight of the decades of distance, the wrong choices and the fears he had never overcome. The past, which he had avoided so much, was there before him, in the form of an innocent child, with no idea of the depth of the pain his simple words had unleashed. He remembered Anna, her last words before he left. "One day, you will regret all of this." At the time, he believed she was just being dramatic. Now, more than 20 years later, he understood exactly what she meant. Regret was overwhelming him. Rodrigo ran his hand through his hair, trying to find a way to deal with that revelation. He looked at the girl once more, now fully aware that she was his granddaughter, and the feeling was overwhelming. He had missed so many moments: Gabriel's first steps, her first words, her childhood, her adolescence. Everything he would never get back. And now before him was proof that time waits for nothing. Gabriel had moved on, built a life, formed a family. And Rodrigo, the absent father, was not part of any of that. The question that tormented him now was it too late to fix what he had broken? Rodrigo stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the moment on his shoulders. Every word the girl had said echoed in his mind, and the past he had spent decades avoiding now consumed him with overwhelming force. As he looked at his granddaughter, a flood of conflicting emotions hit him hard: regret, guilt, shame, and most of all, the inescapable reality that he had failed as a father. He ran his hand over his face, trying to process it all. The emotional dilemma unfolding inside him was suffocating. For so many years, Rodrigo had convinced himself that his decision to leave Gabriel behind was the right choice. He had always told himself that Gabriel, away from his complicated life, would have a better childhood, a more stable adolescence, and that perhaps he would be spared the disappointments that Rodrigo thought he would inevitably cause. He believed that he was protecting his son by walking away. But now, it all seemed like a big lie. The innocent face of the girl in front of him, smiling and curious, only reinforced the abyss of everything he had lost. Rodrigo began to realize with a wrenching pain that nothing, absolutely nothing, could fill the void he had created by giving up Gabriel. His business empire, the fortune he had accumulated, the luxury cars, the trips around the world. Everything seemed so small, so insignificant compared to the absence of a connection with his own son. Rodrigo tried to justify his choices over the years. He remembered how, in his youth, he had been completely absorbed by the idea of being someone. He came from a humble family, where money was always scarce, and the ambition to change his life dominated him. With the mindset that success would justify everything, he had thrown himself headfirst into work, putting his dreams and goals above all else. When Gabriel was born, Rodrigo was at the height of this unbridled search, and the fear of being an inadequate father, combined with his obsession with success, made him choose to walk away. At that moment, he believed it was the best thing to do. But now, looking at the reality around him, it all seemed like a weak excuse. He knew deep down that his absence had nothing to do with Gabriel's well-being, but rather with his own inability to handle the responsibility. He had buried himself in work and allowed fatherhood to slip through his fingers like sand through his fingers. The dilemma was now overwhelming. Rodrigo wondered if he should seek out Gabriel, try to fix what had broken. But did he still have the right to do that? Would it be fair to show up, after so many years, and demand a place in the life of the son he had abandoned? The fear of rejection, of discovering that Gabriel didn't want to know about him, tightened his heart. And at the same time, he could no longer ignore the emptiness growing inside him, an emptiness that no amount of money or success could ever fill. Rodrigo thought about the moments he had lost. Gabriel's first words, his first steps, his birthdays, the life lessons he didn't teach. Every part of Gabriel's childhood, every stage of his life, passed without Rodrigo being there. He wasn't the father he should have been, and that now consumed him in a way he never imagined possible. What haunted him the most was the realization that his absence could have left scars on Gabriel. Had his son grown up feeling abandoned? Had he missed a father who was never there? Or had Gabriel simply forgotten him? The idea that his son could have learned to live without him, without even remembering who he was, hurt more than anything else. Rodrigo's granddaughter stood there, swinging the small backpack she was carrying on her back, oblivious to the emotional battle that was taking place inside that man. To her, everything seemed simple. She didn't know the complexity involved in the relationship between her father and that unknown man who now stood before her. Rodrigo wondered if Gabriel was happy. The girl seemed to love him deeply, and this brought a slight relief to Rodrigo's heart. But at the same time, it intensified his guilt. Gabriel had managed to build a life, to be a good father, something that he, Rodrigo, had never been able to be. The biggest dilemma, however, was about the future. What would he do from now on? Did he have the courage to face Gabriel, to tell the truth about his mistakes, to ask for forgiveness? Did he deserve a second chance? Or would it be better to remain distant, allowing his son to move on with his life without the interference of a father he only knew from old photos? Rodrigo knew he had to make a decision. The dilemma was right in front of him, and the choice he made would define the rest of his life. The little girl, with the simplicity and innocence of childhood, looked at Rodrigo as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "My father keeps your photo in his wallet. Maybe he wants to see you," she said with a slight smile. That, however, fell like a bomb in Rodrigo's heart. He was silent for a few seconds, trying to absorb what he had just heard. Gabriel kept his photo. After all these years, after so much time without contact, without a single word exchanged, Gabriel still carried a photo of himself? That detail, small for the girl, was enough to make Rodrigo feel a wave of overwhelming emotions. Hope, guilt, and even fear mixed inside him. Rodrigo hesitated. What did that photo mean? Was it a bitter reminder of an absent father, or a memory of someone Gabriel still, somehow, wanted to meet? He looked at the little girl, who was watching him with a sweet and unpretentious curiosity, waiting for his answer, as if she were waiting for a new game or a fun outing. Did he say something about me?" Rodrigo asked with a choked voice, unsure if he really wanted to know the answer. Did Gabriel remember him with resentment? Did he hold a grudge from so many years of absence? Rodrigo knew that his absence could have left deep scars. What Gabriel's daughter would reveal could define what he should do next. The girl shook her head, still smiling. "He never talks much. But Grandma said you were his friend when he was little. I don't think he knows what happened, but he always looks at your picture sometimes." Her voice was light, as if she were telling something trivial, but for Rodrigo, that was the biggest revelation of his life. Gabriel thought about him. Maybe not with hatred, but with curiosity, longing, or who knows, hope. Rodrigo felt a tightness in his chest. For so many years, he had convinced himself that his absence was the best thing for Gabriel. He had run away from his responsibilities, immersed in the pursuit of success and the fear of being a failed father. But now, with that little sentence, the wall he had built around his heart began to crumble. The idea that Gabriel, after all these years, still kept a part of him, deeply affected Rodrigo. He hesitated for a few more seconds, an internal battle unfolding within him. What should he do? Would it be fair to reappear in Gabriel's life, after so long? Did he have the right to mess up his son's life again, after all these years of silence? The fear of being rejected was there, latent, but there was also something new, the desire to try, to face the past and, who knows, remedy the mistakes made. "Do you think your father would be happy to see me?" Rodrigo asked, his voice still shaking, unsure of what to expect from the answer. He didn't want to scare the girl, but he needed to understand, somehow, if Gabriel was holding any hurt or resentment. The girl thought for a moment, frowning as if she were trying to decipher something very important, and then shrugged, unconcerned. "I think so. He's nice. He always takes me out for ice cream, and he says family is important." She laughed softly, as if she had just remembered an inside joke. "He always tells me that one day I'll understand these adult things." The word family stuck in Rodrigo's heart. He was part of this family, even if distant, even if absent. And for the first time in many years, he felt that maybe he could do something about it. Filled with a mix of feelings, fear, hope, regret, Rodrigo took a deep breath and looked directly at the girl. "Could you take me to your father?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. It was a decision he had never thought he would make until a few minutes ago. But now, standing there in front of his granddaughter, all he wanted to do was try. Try to repair what he had destroyed, try to reconnect with Gabriel, and maybe, just maybe, give himself one last chance to be the father he had never been. The little girl jumped up excitedly, happy at the idea of doing this. "Of course. He's home now. Let's go." She held out her small hand to Rodrigo, as if she were ready for a great adventure. The simple gesture, so innocent and welcoming, almost made Rodrigo collapse with emotion. Gabriel's daughter didn't see him as a stranger, as someone from the distant past. She saw him as someone who could be a part of her life, without complications or judgments. To her, he was just the man in the picture in Daddy's wallet. Rodrigo held the little girl's hand, feeling a lump in his throat. That small gesture meant much more than she could have imagined. And at that moment, as she took the first step alongside her granddaughter, she knew she was about to face the most important decision of her life, meeting Gabriel again. Rodrigo followed the little girl through streets he didn't recognize. With each step, the weight of reality seemed to grow heavier. It wasn't just his granddaughter's hand he was holding, it was guilt, regret, and the hope of fixing what he had destroyed so many years ago. They walked through a modest neighborhood, very different from the luxurious world he was used to. The houses were simple, with worn facades, but the neighborhood exuded a sense of community and warmth that contrasted sharply with the coldness and emptiness of his mansion. Gradually, Gabriel's house came into view. It wasn't large or imposing, but it had a simplicity that seemed inviting. Flowers in the garden, toys scattered around the yard, and a dog that ran up to the girl when she opened the gate. Life pulsed in that place in a way Rodrigo hadn't experienced in years. Every detail of that house, the laughter of children from neighboring houses, the clothes hanging on the clothesline, all seemed like a painful reminder of how he had wasted his own chance to have a life like that, full of affection. Rodrigo stopped in front of the gate. He felt nervous, as if he were about to face a court. His heart was beating fast, his hands were sweating, and for a moment he thought about giving up. After all, he had abandoned Gabriel. What would his son think when he saw him there, after so long? Rodrigo had no idea how he would be received, or if he would be received at all. But there he was, and something inside him was pushing him to move forward. The girl ran ahead, entering through the open door. "Daddy! Daddy! There's someone here to see you," she cried with the excitement characteristic of a child. Rodrigo, however, could not move. He stood still near the gate, looking at that house as if it were a portal to a past that he did not know if he wanted to revisit. And then, he heard footsteps coming from inside. Rodrigo's heart nearly stopped. Gabriel appeared in the doorway, his expression surprised. The man he saw there was very different from the little boy he had left behind. Gabriel was older, stronger, and there was a weariness in his eyes that Rodrigo didn't recognize, but that was unmistakable to someone who had faced life head-on. However, there was something else, a serenity, perhaps a maturity that only time could give. For a moment, the two of them were silent, exchanging glances. It was as if time had stopped, and the decades between them were too heavy to be broken with simple words. Rodrigo opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He didn't know what to say. Apologies? Explanations? He had no idea where to begin. Gabriel, on the other hand, took a deep breath and took a step forward. "Dad." He said the word with a mixture of surprise and disbelief, as if it were something he never imagined he would say again. Rodrigo felt his heart tighten at hearing it. He was a father, something he had denied himself for so long. And at that moment, he realized that lost time could not be recovered, but perhaps there was still something to be built from then on. Rodrigo tried, but his voice failed. He looked at Gabriel, waiting for a sign, something that would tell him that there was still room for him in that life. Gabriel watched him for a few more seconds, and then, as if he had finally understood something important, he gave a small smile, sad but sincere. "Come in. We have a lot to talk about." Rodrigo, feeling a mixture of relief and nervousness, followed his son into the house. The journey was just beginning, and he knew there was still a lot to face. But for the first time in years, he felt that there was a chance, however small, to reconnect with his son and, who knows, with a part of himself that he had abandoned so long ago. As Rodrigo tried to process Gabriel's words, the conversation between the two took a deeper path. The weight of the past seemed increasingly present, and the need for explanations that had previously seemed distant now became inevitable. Rodrigo knew that this was the moment to open his heart and understand, once and for all, how Gabriel saw his absence. Sitting at the table in the small living room, surrounded by the cozy simplicity of Gabriel's house, the silence was broken only by the distant sound of children playing in the backyard. Rodrigo, still emotional, looked at his hands, not sure how to begin. But Gabriel, with a serenity that Rodrigo did not expect, took the lead in the conversation. "You know, my mother never held a grudge against you," Gabriel began, his voice soft but full of meaning. Rodrigo looked up, surprised by the statement. He had always imagined that he had left a trail of hurt and unhealed wounds behind, especially with Gabriel's mother. "She always told me that you had your reasons. That your leaving was a difficult decision, but that you did what you thought was right at the time." Rodrigo swallowed hard, feeling the impact of Gabriel's words. For so many years, he had carried the guilt and regret for having left his son and his mother behind. The idea that she didn't harbor hatred or resentment toward him was something that had never crossed his mind. "I always thought that she hated me. That she was angry with me for not staying, For not being the father you deserved, Rodrigo confessed, his voice choked with emotion. Gabriel shook his head slowly, giving a slight smile. No, Dad. She never taught me to hate you. On the contrary, she told me that you loved us, but that you made the choice you thought was best for us. She never hid that from me. Gabriel's sincerity was disarming. He spoke without resentment, with a maturity that Rodrigo had not expected, like someone who understood the sacrifices of life, even if they came with pain. Rodrigo felt his heart tighten. That revelation hit him deeply. He had never forgiven himself for his decision to move away, but knowing that Gabriel's mother understood, and more than that, did not blame him, was something he never imagined he would hear. I didn't want to make you suffer. I thought it would be best to move away, to let you grow up without my uncertainties, my fears. At that time, I was a lost young man, without direction. I didn't know how to be a father. I was afraid of failing you and your mother, Rodrigo said, his voice trembling as he tried to express the feelings that had tormented him for so many years. Gabriel listened attentively, without interrupting. He knew that those words were important, not only to Rodrigo, but to him as well. I understand, Gabriel replied after a few moments. When I was younger, I didn't understand. I would get angry. I would wonder why you had left. But as I grew up, I realized that things aren't always that simple. And my mother always told me that you never stopped caring. She said that you walked away because you thought it was best for me. Rodrigo felt a lump in his throat. It was hard to believe that, despite everything, Gabriel had managed to maintain such a balanced view of what had happened. I always thought I was protecting you by walking away. But now, seeing you here, realizing the man you've become, I see that I made a big mistake. I should have stayed. I should have fought to be present in your life, Rodrigo confessed, tears streaming down his face. Gabriel took a deep breath, touched by his father's sincerity. You did what you thought was right. And despite everything, I grew up knowing that you loved me, even from a distance. There was never any doubt about that. Maybe time has helped me understand your choices better. I had a good life, Dad. My mother was amazing. And in a way, I always knew that one day we would meet again. Those words were like a balm for Rodrigo's wounded heart. He had always believed that his separation had caused more pain than relief, but now in front of Gabriel, he saw that, despite everything, his son had grown up with love, understanding, and most surprisingly, without resentment. Rodrigo wiped his eyes, feeling a wave of gratitude. I don't deserve this forgiveness. But I thank you for giving me this chance to be here now. Gabriel smiled gently. The past is behind us, Dad. What matters now is what we do from now on. In that moment, Rodrigo understood that, despite all his flaws, Gabriel's love and understanding had given him a second chance. And for the first time in many years, he felt he could begin to make peace with himself and the son he had left behind. The atmosphere in Gabriel's home had changed. The reunion, which had initially seemed fraught with tension and pain, began to transform into something lighter, more welcoming. Gabriel, with his calm and understanding disposition, showed Rodrigo the life he had built. The room was filled with family photos, children's laughter, and shared moments. It was clear that, despite Rodrigo's absence, Gabriel had found happiness and love. I've built a good life, Dad, Gabriel said with a genuine smile. I have a loving family and friends who have become a second family to me. My mother taught me to value human connections above all else. He showed Rodrigo the photos of his children, his wife, and the simple happy moments that had formed the core of his life. Rodrigo watched, impressed and moved. Gabriel's happiness was palpable, and Rodrigo felt a mixture of pride and regret for not having been a part of it. As the conversation flowed, the atmosphere between father and son became lighter. Rodrigo realized that the greatest wealth in life was not in his possessions, but in the connections and relationships he built. He understood that, as impressive as his financial empire was, nothing compared to the value of having a close-knit and loving family. I want to be here for you, Rodrigo said sincerely. For my granddaughter, for you. I promise I won't let the past repeat itself. I will do my best to be present and participate in your lives. Gabriel extended his arms, and the two embraced, a simple gesture, but one loaded with meaning. The reconciliation was complete and true. The embrace marked the beginning of a new phase for both of them. Rodrigo was invited to participate in family celebrations and to build new bonds with his granddaughter and the other members of the family. As he walked away from Gabriel's house, Rodrigo felt a peace he had not experienced in a long time. He had found what really mattered, the chance to reconnect with his son and be part of the life he had lost. The promise of a better future, based on love and presence, became the new wealth that Rodrigo carried with him.